How long have I been trying to get you to do this? 4 years?
A couple of days.
No, 4 years probably, right?
Yeah, it was probably. When did you get in the business?
When I get in the business, it was, late 80s. Yeah.
Well, and as long as we've known each other, when I came to you with a sore arm as a sports medicine doctor, and you're saying, what's all those rugs and baskets doing around here and everything? And you were starting to get interested. That was just wonderful.
Yeah, I'd already done actually a show by then. I'd done Kim Martindale's show.
Yes.
That was about 89, I think. And I was a physician at that point.
Uh-huh.
So in Los Angeles, Orange County, down with the Marine Corps in Tustin. So I was doing it then. I was dealing it before. And then I came here for residency. And I was already in trouble.
Yeah.
Because I knew I loved this stuff. I think the first person I met probably was Higgins.
Yes.
Who I'll talk to here shortly. But you had to be
he's a prize to have met.
Yeah.
He still is today. Yes,
a little younger. You were a little younger too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm sure you thought, great, another person coming in to deal Indian art in Tucson.
Well, there were so many. It was just like this plethora of everybody just quitting their jobs and doing it. And it was an unbelievable explosion. I want to get into that a little bit.
It was. Yeah.
But before we get into anything, I just want to say, Mark, that this would not be happening, and I would not be happening without my wife, Peggy, because she has been through this whole thing such a good friend and a wonderful cook and a great mom and spiritually just the best person in the world. And she's the gal that really kept this all together and enabled all this to happen, going from profession to profession like I was doing. Yeah. She's the cognizant force. And as was, my folks for me and her folks for her, and our son and daughter is the art of their kids. So it's just been a wonderful ride. Can't even believe how lucky a life.
And it has been a long ride too. This is like when did you start dealing in this material?
Well, I started dealing actually probably about 56 years ago. My heritage came from my mom and my dad. My dad was a photographer in World War II.
And what did he shoot? What did he do?
He was on the USS Hornet.
Yeah.
That flew 30 seconds over Tokyo. That big, Doolittle and all those guys flew off the Hornet. It's the second largest public interest spot in Oakland now. It still sits in the harbor. And
was he Air Force?
No, he was Navy.
He was Navy. Okay.
And he didn't know how to swim. Yeah. And they were going to teach him how to swim when it went out to sea. So he stayed right in the middle of that aircraft carrier the whole time. Yeah. But he had to take pictures of all the kamikaze guys coming down trying to blitz him and everything. He just had unbelievable
And he
photos.
did take pictures of the kamikaze?
Oh, sure. He took pictures. He was out there taking pictures of everything on that aircraft carrier.
Was he trained in photography?
Sure. Yeah, he was trained. Well, he never graduated he graduated from high school and went into journalism, working with a local paper there in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and boom, the war hit and he was off. So he never came back and got any college, although he became the editor of the, he was an editor at the Arizona Republic up in Phoenix and a photographer. He freelanced for Arizona Highways, and he was just a great guy. And he was just the most compassionate, wonderful guy that helped me through school and especially through writing and things because of the kind of perspicuity he had as an editor. I give him an essay that I was going to turn in high school, and all those editors had those big red crayons.
Right.
It looked like somebody just sliced that thing up in a knife fight. Give it back. He says, "Now look, is this what you're going to want to say?" Yeah. Or is all of this?
He's a journalist.
Yeah, he was.
He's a journalist, but also a photographer journalist as well.
That's right.
Did he talk about what it was like to see a kamikaze come in at him? And
he didn't talk a lot about the war.
Yeah, he never did.
He talked about missing his fiancée, my mom. Mm. He came into San Diego for a leave of maybe like a week. He proposed to her. She's working in a war plant on the East Coast. Where are we going to meet? well, let's see. I got a map here. Memphis is right in the middle of the country. Let's meet at Memphis. She takes a troop train. He does too. He beats her there.
Right.
They're supposed to be there in mid-afternoon. She gets there late. So they're looking at that, and times were different then, Mark. And so they're looking, they said, we can't spend the night together. We're not even married. So a cabbie overheard him. He said, hop in the cab. We'll go across the river here, the Mississippi. He woke up a minister that he knew. He said, we got somebody up here who wants to get married. He said, come on inside here. Got the kids out there up by the balcony. They get married there, and they get a room together that night. So, but anyway, that was it. And my mom was a phenomenal writer, too. She wrote the Arizona Highways cookbooks, and she was going to do a cookbook with DeGrazia and with Lolema that never got finished. But she was the main force on the Indian stuff because she was one of the founders of the Docent Guild at the Heard Museum, and she wrote the book, The Heard Museum Guild.
But they were living here.
No, they were living in Phoenix. We grew up in Phoenix.
Okay.
Yes. So I grew up in that basement. Yeah. And Tom Kane
so we were just talking about this. I just had this on the ground. It's something you read, right? This is very interesting. And Terry goes, oh, yeah, I know that person. Yeah, my dad took all the photographs. Yeah, tell people about what this was.
Yeah, that's a photograph from the State Fair of maybe like 1950-something or 60-something. And that was right out in the middle of the arena at the Arizona State Fair where the horses went around and everything else. And he took pictures of that. He also took tons of pictures of Bert Robinson's collection, the guy that wrote the Basket Weavers of Arizona, the Bible on Arizona.
Do you think this is what got you interested in baskets?
All this was, sure. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I mean.
And weaving.
Because he's taking pictures of him. He's being involved with your father, and your mother's involved with the Heard.
I'm taking classes as an adolescent in art at the Heard Museum, and that's what got me interested in anthropology and everything else.
Interesting.
So as that went on and went through high school.
Well, let's start back a little bit before. Okay. By the way, this is Terry DeWald we have on. We just started. But so you grew up in Phoenix.
Grew up in Phoenix.
And your father did still continue to do photography and journalism?
Right, in Phoenix. That's where he did it all. He gave up a life in Pennsylvania to come out with this new opportunity here in the West.
Because there was job.
Absolutely. And he was flat broke. He was out of the service.
Just out of it.
Yeah. And he just ate this up. He thought the West was the neatest thing in the world. And
he fell in love with native material fairly quickly.
He did. Not as much as my mother. But
and where was she from?
She was from, they went to high school together.
In Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they came out and established a life here. I was born, and actually, I was born in Pennsylvania. I was out here before I was a year old.
Yeah, so you're at Tucson, doesn't it? Or Phoenix, whatever.
Right.
Arizonian for sure.
And as far as I became, he was a good ball player. He never got a chance to do anything because of the war. And I was kind of fortunate to be a ball player too. And after my freshman year in high school, I got my first look at a culture outside of Native American because there was a ball player that played for the Baltimore Orioles in the Hall of Fame, Jim Palmer.
I know who that is. Yeah, he's a great pitcher.
On his right arm, I got a trip to Hawaii to play in the Babe Ruth World Series. And there I was exposed to, the Bishop Museum and all the tapa cloths and all the Hawaiian culture. Mm-hmm. That started a love for Polynesia, which I became a voracious reader of that. And it just went on through, and I had a successful high school career, and I got a scholarship, an academic and a baseball scholarship here to the U of A. Mm-hmm. And that's where the study started and everything. And
so what did you study in college?
I studied the history of the West and anthropology.
So anthropology, and that's what it was called, History of the West?
Well, yeah, that was my, it was history major, but specifically the history of the West.
And anthropology.
Right. And I had a minor in geography because I loved to be outside.
Probably at that time, though, you think, I'm going to be a professional baseball player, right? I mean, you're really good in high school,
That's what I'm keyed in on. But I also was getting a degree in education in case that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Because as I came down here and I saw some of these high schools, I saw a lot of the high school coaches that were teaching and coaching during the year. Then they were working in the national parks in the summer. Mm-hmm. And that just sounded really luscious to me. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was doing too. So After my senior year in college, had a good.
Where did you go to college? U of A, right?
U of A. Yep.
And you played ball.
Played ball here. I was fortunate enough to be the captain my senior year.
Yeah.
And
what was your position?
Second base.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I signed with the Mets after the 1968 college season. Yeah. And that was such a great deal because in the summers in college, I was drafted for 3 years to play in collegiate leagues in the summer. And at that time, so I went to Peoria, Illinois, played in the Central Illinois League. This doesn't have a lot to do with art, Mark. But anyway, it
has a lot to do with who you are, though.
Well,
right?
Yes. So quickly, you had to work an 8-hour job to be in this league, and then you played every night. Mm. And my first job, the first day, after my freshman year, a year out of high school, I'm an ironworker apprentice carrying steel rods and all this rebar all day in the sun, tying rods and everything else.
In Phoenix.
In Peoria, Illinois.
That was in Peoria.
With unbelievable
because you had
humidity.
To work there.
Yeah, I played the whole summer there. Never really went home after my freshman year college. Went there, played ball all summer, and worked these jobs. You know, and I mean, I just remember the first game of the season. We got back. I wolfed down a pot pie. After work that day, jumped on the bus. I told my roomie, I said, "I'm conking out. He woke me up at Springfield. We're playing the Springfield Caps. I was a leadoff hitter because I had some speed. My legs were so wobbly. I hit the first ball, one hop to the shortstop. He threw me out before I even got out of the batter's box, and I fell twice right on the foul line. I had 2 white stripes going down me for the rest of the game like that. But the greatest thing about signing a pro ball is you just play every night, and you've got it made. Yeah. And that was just like a revelation to me. So I said, I still had a semester to go to finish my degree, but man, I spent all my time in libraries and zoos and museums and everything else, getting paid to go around the country to have some guy throw this white thing at your head. It was just unbelievably fun. So, anyway, so I had after my first year in pro ball, I played winter ball with the New York Mets. Winter League team, and the next year they would win the World Series, the Miracle Mets of '69. So I played with all those guys. Wow. And
so did you get a ring with that?
No, I wasn't part of because I was in the minor leagues next year.
I got it.
The Durham Bulls.
Yeah,
I was playing for
Kevin Costner.
And so I worked up through the minor leagues through Visalia, California, and then Memphis, Tennessee. Right. Made all league on several of the leagues. And then Cleveland picked up my contract, which was fine because I had 3 guys ahead of me at second base in the Mets system. Yeah. And with the Indians, I thought I had a really good chance. Plus, they had just acquired Eddie Leon, who's a legend here in Tucson, who was a 2 or 3 time All-American. He and I set the NCAA record for double plays when we played together. He was a year older than me. So this was going to be great. Spring training right here at High Corbett Field. I blew my knee out. In a really massive injury. And
on the field?
On the field.
It was an ACL you blew out?
All 4.
Oh, you ripped the whole thing. Yeah.
All, and broke off the bottom of my femur.
Oh, yeah, that was a bad one.
Yeah. So I was in a cast for months, and they said, you'll be lucky to really kind of walk without a limp. But I rehabbed quite a bit, especially with the U of A trainers. And when I was in the hospital, Coach Sansett, the coach at the ball club, and Dick Clausen, who was the athletic director, said, there's a high school here in town. They just fired their baseball coach, and you might be okay to go in there. I said, wait a minute. You usually have to coach 3 years in the freshman and 10 years at the JV to get this. He said, they're going to give you the job. Yeah. So I interviewed, I got it, and boom, I'm in there off and running.
How old are you at this point?
I was probably like... I don't know, 26, something like that.
Is this like 1970 that this happened?
This is I got hurt the spring training of 71, so it's a 71, 72 school year.
And Vietnam came, but you didn't have to go because you were in school most of that time?
That's right. And plus, I've got these really hairy knots on the bottom of my knees called Osgood slavis.
Yeah, I know what that is.
And
usually develop at like 13 and 14 is when you get that.
Real painful.
Yeah, they are.
And they said, you'll never make it through basic training on your knees.
No, you probably won't because you get it from overuse syndromes.
Yeah. So I got a 4F and I'm playing pro ball. Figure that one out.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway.
So that's 72?
71, 70, spring of 72.
Yeah.
I'm getting my team ready. I get a contract from the Indians. You will be in spring training April 1st.
To play ball. And
I said, no, I'm not, because I've signed this year contract. I break this contract, which is a dream contract, and I'm done as a teacher and a coach. And I said, plus, I can just barely start walking and running again.
Yeah.
They said, you get yourself in shape. The day your contract ends, we're sending you to Reno in the Cal League to get in shape, and then we'll see what happens. We got a lot of money invested in you in that knee operation. So I said, that's a good summertime job again, I guess. So I went up there, and that was Class A ball. I had been playing on a AA, AAA contract, so that was like sending me back to Little League.
Right.
And I was just lighting it up. And after about a week, they said, we're moving you up. But just like you said in Nam, the guy that was playing third base in the class ahead of me up in the Eastern League, he was going to his whatever the, what you used to get into to get out of the war was the reserve, and he was doing his duty then. So they said, but you'll be playing third base, so move over to third base. They had a guy hitting me before the ball game, just line drives to third base. One took a bad hop, hit me right here, shattered my nose. Woke up in the hospital in Stockton, California, and they said, you're on the DL for the rest of the year. You get hit there again, and that could kill you.
Yeah.
So I figured somebody up there is telling me to get out of this sport. I had just met Peg, and in fact, she came up to, I was at Reno, she came up to Lake Tahoe and was dealing cards there. And so I came back, finished my master's in reading, and never went back. So I never got released, but I got a contract the next year too, but I just said, this is it.
Yeah.
So.
Did you know what you wanted to do at that? I mean, that's a pivotal point, right, in your life.
Yeah. That's like having an iron door shut right in your nose.
Yeah.
You know what?
No, it is.
Yeah. With all the, it really was kind of devastating.
I'm sure. And you're like 26.
Yeah,
or
but you knew it was going to happen sometime anyway.
I know, but you don't think in your 20s it's going to be you.
Right.
And you've had a very successful career, and you like it.
Yep.
And your dad would have done it if he could, but he didn't get to. So he's super proud of you.
Yes.
Thinks this is just phenomenal.
Yep.
So it had to be extremely difficult.
It was. But it was also really rewarding, not only working with these kids at Sunnyside that weren't really in a high rent district, that were just super hungry, and the Native Americans that came there from the Santa Vera Mission. And it was great coaching those kids, because they'd come to maybe like Sabino High School, and there was no Foothills High then. And their mouths would just drop as we went through those neighborhoods, taking a look at some of those homes and everything. And they knew this was one chance of life they were going to get to be dominant. And boy, they were pumped up, and they did it. So
how long did you do that teaching?
I coached for 5 years, but I immediately started getting interested in the Native Americans, because some of my students, I'd give them a ride home or something like that, and I'd see their moms making baskets, and I would see how little they were getting paid for those baskets, And at that time, right before that, a great guy came into my life. His name was O.W. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a World War II veteran as well. And he was a former foreman on a ranch down in Patagonia. And he was a construction worker. And the summer before I got hurt, I started working construction, and we were laying water pipe. I just wanted to put on some weight and everything. And he said, I do a lot of hunting on the reservation. You want to go out there with me sometime? I said, sure. Went out there. We shot a few ducks when you could still hunt on the reservation. And I saw him getting some of these baskets as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was a cog. And he was just the most gentlemanly old cowboy guy, like a lot of your Western artists and everything. And he took me under his wing, and that just really spurred me on. Peggy and I would go out there with him and his wife, and then we started going out on our own and everything else. And it was just it was just inspirational. So
was he buying and selling, or was he?
He was just keeping.
He was a collector.
Yeah,
and he got them directly from the makers.
Right, and he had, he was not a wealthy guy, but he had a whole wall full of baskets. And at that time, Mark, as you know, everybody was going Indian crazy, Indian art crazy.
It was, and that's
Elvis
early 70s.
and Concho Belts and Sonny and Cher and John Denver and
everybody,
all these guys. Right. And it just spilled over into the arts from all that jewelry and everything,
yes.
And just revived everything. Much like it was at the turn of the last century when all those, opulent collectors like the Rockefellers and Carnegie and all those guys are collecting. Hearst were collecting all that stuff. Yeah. So anyway, I started going out there a little bit more often, and I said, and Peggy and I was teaching on a year-round school. She was teaching high school special ed, and we'd take weekends and stuff, and we'd go on up to national parks, and I started securing these accounts, and so it was fun for us. It was just really romantic doing that, and we ended up getting some pretty good accounts, and I found myself spending more and more time away from doing 100% for these kids coaching. I had 5 preps every day at high school. I could still get all those done and grade my papers, but I knew there was going to be an end to this.
Yeah.
Right when we were just about to go, I got named Coach of the Year like my 4th or 5th year, so I had hit this zenith almost myself
pretty quickly.
Yeah, but it was still it was time to get out, because as it turned out, we had a daughter who was a year and a half old. Then my son was about to get born. I quit at the semester time, and I was sticking my neck out because we didn't have 2 pennies to put together. And I said, I think I can make this. I asked my dad's advice. He said, you know what? Try it. And so that's what happened.
And the thought was, I can buy these baskets from these makers. I have the relationships with them. I can take them and sell them to the national parks.
Right.
And I can make a living doing that.
Right. Because when the trading post bought them and everything, they put a substantial percentage on them, and then they would get keystoned in the stores, in the concessions, which they had to pay their concession dues to the national parks and their overhead and electricity and help and everything else. So I just made a shorter margin, and it just went great. And then I really started getting interested in the old stuff as well. But
you made relationships with all these weavers,
right?
And are you 30 yet at this point?
Yeah, I'm 30.
Yeah. And so, what year is this that you kind of?
Well, I really started rolling probably about I don't know, 75, 76, 77, 78 in there. It was really taken on. And I mean, there were so many stores. You know how many stores there were here in Tucson. I could go up to Phoenix with a full truck full of baskets. I think there'll be a picture of my truck just overflowing with the baskets. And I could end up selling, I don't know how many shops. Old Territorial Shop, Pueblo One, Gallery 10, House of the Six Directions, Sewell's, Ortega's, and then all the way up through Sedona and everything else, that you'd be nuts not to make a living off of it if you knew what you were doing. I was buying from 278 weavers 2 times a week. Today, I buy from under 30 weavers every 2 weeks.
Do you think it'll exist in 10 years?
No. I mean, and it's not paying for my gas even now.
No, I know. But will the weavers still be weaving?
Well, no, there will be just less and less weavers.
Yeah. You went from 278 in 1976 to 30 now?
Yeah, to 30 now that I can buy consistently from. When I went out last Thursday, I didn't buy for more than 10 weavers.
Yeah.
And that's being gone from 4:30 in the morning till about 5:30 at night. That's a 13-hour day with a full tank of gas. And
you go and stop at each weaver's house.
Right.
They've known you for maybe some of these for 40, 50 years.
Well, for like 3rd generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so you come, that if they're going to have baskets, you buy those baskets, and then you still work with the national parks, right?
Sure. I still have the national park concessions. Plus, Desert Museum. And I used to sell Kit Peak, all their stuff, and all sorts of other stores, Western National Parks and Miners Association, Tohono O'Odham, a lot of these places. So
what happens when you're gone and there's nobody to go buy the baskets?
That's it. And I just wish nobody could end up doing this and making enough living for their family to do it anymore. And as much as the tribe has tried to start their own self-help programs, that usually falls through too. And it's just too bad. But they'll always be able to sell some baskets to somebody. It's just the ones that don't have transportation that I feel so sorry for.
Right, and that's, I don't think people realize, you're talking about way out in the middle of nowhere.
Boy, you are. You are. I mean, but there's nothing more renewing than, I'll leave in the dark, and by the time I get on the other side of the Babakivari Mountains, the sun's coming up. It's so beautiful, and it just renews you. And
that's the sacred mountain for Tohono O'Odham, is the Babakivari.
Right.
And do you go all the way down to the Mexican border?
Not quite.
Yeah.
I used to go all the way down there, but it's just really pretty hairy right now.
Yeah.
Plus, there are no weavers south of the road that goes from Sells to Rocky Point. So everything's north, with the exception of 2 villages. Everything's north of that road. So
how many miles will you drive in a day?
A little over 300.
Wow.
But a lot of stuff, bumpy roads and things like
dirt
that.
Roads.
Yeah, dirt roads. And, there's one gal, Sophie Seraficio, who's a wonderful gal. And I walked in there the other week on her, and it's 110 degrees maybe inside her house. She's got electricity. She doesn't have a cooler or an air conditioning unit. I bought them for some of the weavers out there, but she said, no, this is okay. And she's weaving, and she's perspiring. And I just say, Sophie, you're a prize. She said, I'm happier than heck. You're come here and buy these from me every 2 weeks, and you used to twice a week. And my mom taught me this, and I remember my grandmother, and she's sitting right next to a wood-burning stove where she's going to cook her dinner that night.
Yeah.
Who knows what it's going to be by the time that thing fires up.
Was.
But she's happy and content as heck. And she goes to bed every night when the sun goes down, and they're just really in tune with the earth, a lot of them.
Yeah,
and this has exposed me to so many metaphysics and wonderful beliefs that are different than you would ever have imagined by never being in touch with them.
Yeah.
It's just neat. And probably the most inspirational person is the gal on the cover of my book. Her name is Rufina Morris.
Mm-hmm.
She took me under her wing and taught me how to weave, how to gather materials, prepare them, weave the basket. And she never had any kids.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my students recommended, you ought to go, she's probably the best. You ought to just go talk to her a little bit. So she set me up. She had an unbelievable history. She ended up working in the fields as a young girl with her folks in Marana. They were coming back into town to get supplies one night in the back of their foreman's pickup truck in a big wind blast, a monsoon thing. They head on with somebody else, kills her dad, flips her out, breaks her arm. And she was a great young weaver at that time, but then she stopped weaving. And she stopped weaving for a couple of years. And one of the priests from Santa Vera came to her and he said, trying to rehabilitate her, he said, Rufina, next year I'm going to Rome. The Pope does not have a Papago basket. You're going to make one.
Mm.
And that pumped her up, and she did. And then I got her just a little bit after that. I started showing her these old patterns that my dad took of Bert Robinson's baskets and everything. All those baskets she's holding on the cover of the book are all remakes of his, there are a couple of originals of hers too.
Yes.
So she just flourished from that.
Mm.
But she just was something. I mean, the stories I would just sit and listen to her tell, and with our kids. I said, when's the first time you ever went to Magdalena for the pilgrimage they do every year to visit Kino's grave? And she said, the first year I never made it. She said, because we got to the border. I was so excited. My uncle came in the buckboard, went all the way down there. The sun was going down. We camped in a wash, got up the next morning, and we were all surrounded by all these horsemen. And my dad came over and he said, we can't go any further. We're going to have to turn around. And she said, why, Dad? She said, because of that man right there. And she said, they had all these bullets like this.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we would get killed in this revolution if we go down there, so we better turn around. Well, that was Pancho Villa.
Mm.
And not that I'd ever doubt her, but I looked up that exact time with her age. He was between Caborca and Cananea right there, so that she had to hit that right then, you know. And she, when her sister was dying, who was younger, she called me to the hospital and she said, I watched my sister being born underneath the Palo Verde tree, and now I'm watching her die. And I said, what? My mother did not want to come home. She wanted to stay there, and I brought her food every day. I brought her water from our stock pond and all this stuff, and saguaro fruit and everything else. And I mean, there's a way of life there, and here we are. She died like 6 years ago, but I mean, what a lifespan that she saw.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was just.
And wove all that time.
Yeah. And loved it. And
her family, is there any weavers from her?
No, there's two nieces left.
Yeah.
I spoke at her funeral. I gave the eulogy at Santa Vera, but they don't weave.
Yeah.
No.
That's lost.
But anyway, she taught me to make this first basket. I made a basket of her in a red dress. The horrible thing was every time I went over to her house, I saw that ugly thing right over her fireplace.
That you had made. Yeah. Now, you wrote a book on Tohono O'Odham baskets.
Right.
And is it still in print?
I published it because nobody else wanted to do it with all the color in it and everything.
Yeah.
And I think I just did the last printing of it. I printed like 6 times.
Yeah.
But I thought that was mandatory, Mark, because where they sat at the national parks, people went by and said, wow, what is that? Mexican? Maybe that's African. Is that from Afghanistan? With that book there, they looked at the book, then they looked at the basket, then they look at the book, and it kind of tied it together. Yeah. So I think it really
and it gives credit to the weavers.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is important.
And I mean, it's kind of like the whole history of the tribe and everything else in there too, and their culture. And a lot of things have changed since that time. But the book still is kind of like, it's still out there. And I think I still might have, 10 boxes left, and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
That's going to be it.
And you started learning about the old baskets at some point, because for those people who don't know it, I would consider you to be one of the world's experts in all sorts of Southwest, Western, California, all baskets, basically. Early baskets.
Right.
How did that happen?
That fostered my interest in that.
How did you become that guy? Because you are that guy.
Following Clara Lee Tanner around at the Arizona State Museum.
Who's an anthropologist that lived here.
Those great old ones in there as well. But it was, you don't learn anything. You said something before the interview about what you know about. The more you know about art, the more in trouble you get.
It's true.
Because it just is so wonderful, and it just sucks you in. And that really started my engines going. But the real thing that did was sticking my neck out and buying some of these things.
Yeah,
and then maybe trying to resell them. And the whole trade aspect of old and new. Peggy and I, before we had kids, we'd get a whole bunch of baskets. We'd go over to the Pueblos and trade them for like either Hishi or pottery, went up to Hopi.
Right.
And we thought we were just doing great until we got home and tried to wholesale that stuff. Those people had been traded with the Spanish since the 1500s.
Yeah.
They had our necks, so we had to go retail to retail to do it, to get our money back.
And that's learning the process.
Of course it is. And it's just part of the business.
Late 70s, this is?
Yes.
Yeah, going on.
But all the Indian shows really started happening. I remember you pick up a copy of the Indian Trader, there was an Indian show in every major city, every weekend somewhere in the country.
Yeah.
Well, a gentleman came through here doing a show by the name of Don Bennett. And I fell in love with him. Yeah. And he started mentoring me a little bit too. He was dating Kathy Whitaker at the time. And I really started getting into this stuff. Of course, Higgins had already had a shop here, and Tom Body had a shop.
What year was this that Bennett came through, do you know?
Oh, it probably was in the late 70s sometime.
Yeah, okay.
He was working for McGraw-Hill.
Yeah.
And but you could tell how much he loved this.
Yeah.
So we developed really a great deal. And then I'd catch a Hughes Air West flight over to L.A.
Mm-hmm.
He'd pick me up because I really started selling a lot of stuff for him throughout the Southwest. One time after a show, he just left his van with me. I went on a whole tirade of the whole Southwest, and I dumped about all his jewelry and a lot of his rugs and some of his baskets.
And you go to other dealers and galleries and stuff.
Yeah. But I was giving some lectures at the time too, and I'd sell stuff there. And so he gave me the connotation, "You're the main man." So you never call me Terry, call me the main man. So I'd go to L.A. and he'd pick me up at the airport, come back to his little apartment in Encino, and he'd say, "First thing we're going to do is we're going to pay for this trip for you." He'd open the closet. There'd be so much great stuff in there, just stacked Germantowns and late classics and rugs and baskets and kachinas and everything else. And he said, "What do you kind of like here?" I said, "Here's my cost. You ought to be able to get this for this. That's going to pay for the trip. Now let's go on some consignment." So I'd load up all that stuff, bring it back, sell it.
Right.
And as time went on, he said, "We ought to start a show."
Uh-huh.
And I said, "The place to do it would be in Santa Fe." He said, "You're darn right it would, right before Indian Market." So he said, "You want to go into partners with me on this?" I said, "I'm teaching school. I can't take time away from that, but I'll help you all I can." So the first show in the Hilton,
yes,
in that ballroom there, and they had some rooms down the hall. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
But he said, "All right."
I was in one of those rooms at one time.
Were you?
Yeah.
He said, "Okay. He had a Smith & Wesson pistol. He said, "I'm locking you in this, and I'm going to lock you inside here, and you're my security tonight."
For the whole
had
show.
a cot in there. Yeah, for the whole show. And so I said, "That's great with me." So
what year would this have been? Do you know?
God, I don't know what the first year of the show was. I mean, what's the White Hawk anniversary? Is the almost 50th or something like that? And that was like absolute heaven for me. I mean, that was just
because you had access to everything. You could look at.
I turned on the lights and I went through everybody's stuff.
Yeah, looking at it, learning,
and just feeling. And I had my glass and looking at the difference between Germantowns and Ravel flannel and Saxony and all this stuff. And is that Brackenfern, or is that Devil's Claw, or is that Skirpus? All the baskets and everything. So that was really a fun time. Yeah, and so I mean, it went from there to the Old West show, the ethnographic show, the Native American show,
really
3 shows
up.
right in a way. He had an auction. Allard had the auction.
Yeah. Eros had one.
Eros had the auction. So it was just an incredible
time. There was Bob
time.
Ward before any of those guys.
Bob
too.
Ward, the original Indian trader.
Yeah. Did you know Bob?
Sure.
Yeah.
I know him.
I mean, I knew Bob.
Big game hunter.
Yeah.
Yep. And boy, some of the stuff that went through his hands and Alex Alzavedo's and all those, it was just a real legendary time. And when Ashton closed his gallery and Lee Cohen went in to open Gallery 10, that was a market, real classy operation. And Lee loved the material. Jerry Collins was sort of a partner with him.
Uh-huh.
And you want to talk about somebody that puts my knowledge in baskets to sleep, and that's Collins.
Yeah,
I mean,
for baskets.
Yeah, and he's a phenomenal weaver too.
Yeah,
I mean, he can just the baskets he weaves are did Datsul Ali make this thing or did Collins make this thing?
Yeah, but
he's always been really generous with his time with me too, and we help each other on different things as well. But he was a real cognitive force in that as well.
When did they open Gallery 10? Do you have any idea? When that would have been? I don't know.
It would have been the early 80s also.
Yeah, somewhere in that time. Right?
Yes. And Lee's 2 sons were, Andy and Philip, were involved in it with him. And then he opened up the gallery in Santa Fe. Then they opened a gallery in Manhattan, and Chris Seltzer ran that for him.
Yeah. And Chris had a store here
too, right.
Did you know Chris in the 70s when he had his store here?
Yes. It was right at
Speedway,
right? Speedway and Park, right next to the old drugstore there, and he had some killer stuff in there too. Well, everybody did.
And at that time, were you still teaching when Seltzer had his store? Yeah, it was because his store was pretty early, right?
Yeah, it
72, 74.
And I don't know how long he had that open.
Yeah,
but yeah, and another knowledgeable guy.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm telling for people so they can understand this is this complex culture of individuals that made up who we are and what we lived. And, the people like yourself and myself, I'm on the younger end of the spectrum, but basically 65 is the young end, and they're all into the mid-80s. And this is all changing. We all see it changing. Things are changing, and we're trying to capture these moments and let people understand what it was we went through.
Sure.
And you were right at the beginning and the heart of it. And I was not too far along, but enough that I either kind of was at the tail end of the very early stuff, which I would consider to be, I got in again, 89, whatever, somewhere in there, collecting a little earlier than that, and started collecting when I was really young, just for myself. But to see this transition, and so people can kind of understand, and a lot of the people that are the key players, like Chris Seltzer, who we've been interviewed, and yourself, I consider you to be
Gallegos,
and Bob Gallegos.
You could just name a ton of them.
And you're one of the key people who were baskets and textiles. Textiles also is another area of expertise. How did you get into that component of the weavings that you found so interesting?
Oh, I think it was, again, through Don and his collection.
Yeah, he liked blankets.
But also it was, meeting Joe Ben Wheat and David Winger, and a lot of those people that had the technical expertise and knowledge and proof on what's going on. I just talked to David the other day, and he's doing some wonderful research on the early aniline dyes, which will be revolutionary. So all that just kind of came together. But the main thing, Mark, is how gosh darn fun it was. I mean, I had so much fun through college, and through playing ball. I'd go down to Mexico every Christmas in college with another guy and go down the East Coast, West Coast, just to see all that Aztec and Mayan culture and everything. We'd break down shotguns, put them up under the back seat, and take peanut butter and tortillas and V8 juice, and we just kind of live on the land before ball season started every year, And once ball started, I mean, I was an extra in Catch 22 in the off season one year. And,
what was that?
That was everybody trying to get from being drafted. And so Paramount comes through, interviews all these guys. And, of course, I'm 4F. No, right here in Tucson.
Okay.
Right down the Congress Hotel.
Yeah.
And they say, we need 100 extras for this thing. So I interview and take the train down there. And everybody's got their own little cabana at San Carlos Bay.
Yes.
And it was unbelievable. And then here come these guys in. Art Garfunkel had just broken up with Paul Simon, and I always kind of been musical. So he said, I think we start playing a guitar here?
Yeah.
Going, I don't know. But I mean, Bob Newhart was in that, Martin Sheen, John Voight,
Donald
Richard
Sutherland.
Benjamin. Donald Sullivan wasn't. He was in MASH.
Yeah.
But Alan Arkin was the lead guy in that thing. But Orson Welles was just this magnificent force that came in. So, and John Wayne would come through because he was filming Westerns. So this was eye-opening for me, too. But
and you would be an extra? Have you ever looked at that movie?
Yeah, I'm in it a couple of plays. I was an extra, but then they made me head of the extras because they thought I was a major league ball player and I was just minor league. And they said, when the Mets come through L.A., will you give us tickets? I sure I will. I got 2 years before I get to the Mets, but that's okay. Yeah. But it was really an inexperience. But anyway, all this stuff was so much fun. But this Indian stuff was even more fun. I mean, and there was a guy in town here by the name of Simon Auger. He gave up his seat on the New York Stock Exchange to become an Indian trader. Just the coolest guy.
And when we say Indian trader, what that means is selling Native American material, both contemporary and also early pawn, antique, and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Because I assume a lot of this interest for you really came from the interactions of the Tohono O'Odham out on the reservation.
Absolutely.
I would think that, I mean, you have this bind to those people for more than a half a century.
Yeah, that really engendered the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like Mark Winter is with his Totalina trading post.
And,
I mean, I think it's so important, especially, and people don't think about this, but a lot of the dealers that deal in this early material, when we say early, we're talking historic material, not prehistoric, but they have connections to Native American contemporary artists and people and have close relationships with these artists. Like you name one of the main dealers, and they have somebody that they really. It's not just the historic stuff; it's also the contemporary. It's a living form.
Sure. Yep, it is, and it's a whole part of your life. But I mean, the first time Simon Auger said, I want you just to bring me all the baskets you can. I'm going to go over to Santo Domingo and Santa Clara and San Luis. I'm going to do some trading, and I'll come back. And so he came back, had not one basket left. I'll never forget. Here's all this hishi that he came home with, which was the biggest thing in the world, And he had this big Taos drum. And it was all out there and all the other stuff he traded for and everything. And in this corner were so many $100 bills. I'd never seen that much money together in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, here's your money for the baskets. And I'm going, this is a dream. This can't really be happening. And are the Indians getting traded okay? He said, sure they are. They need those baskets in their ceremonies to serve venison and things. They don't want to do it out of African baskets.
Yeah.
So I would supply him. I'd supply all these other wholesalers. So it just was on fire. But as far as the people themselves, you're right. It's just on the reservation, so many things have happened that have melted my heart. One time going through, I ended up stopping at a weaver's house, and her son Albert was getting his master's in education at the U of A. And he said, I don't have a ride back into town, but once you go down to San Simon and Pacinamo, would you pick me back up going back to town? And I said, sure, Albert. So I took him. And as we're going back towards Sells, there's a wonderful big mesa-type mountain that overlooks his village. And I said, when the Apaches used to come down here and plunder you guys, I said, that would have been a heck of a lookout, to signal that they were coming.
Right.
He said, it was a lookout.
Yeah.
And then he got really quiet. And I looked over, and he had started to well up.
Mm.
And I really felt like I offended him. I said, Albert, I'd never tell anybody about that. I was just curious about that. He said, that's okay. Everybody knows about that. And we did an excavation up there in high school on that place. But he said, and here's a kid that lived traditional Tohono O'Odham on a dirt floor, wood-burning stove, ran every morning, ate tepary beans and cholla fruit and everything else. And he said, I wish you guys would have just missed me by a couple 100 years. I said, what do you mean? He said, I'd be the happiest guy in the world not knowing about the American culture that has been brought to us.
Yeah.
He said, here I came from where you picked me up. I'm going to have an air-conditioned dorm tonight. I'm going to probably get a burger at McDonald's, and I'm going to have air conditioning. And he said, that tears my heart. And I'm sure you see it in a lot of the Navajo too, because they're so isolated, but with that internet now, it's just brought right to them, and it's just, there's a whole nother culture out there. What's going on here? Yeah. And it's just, just something to contemplate. And I think that's why I'm losing a lot of the weavers.
Yeah. Though luckily there are still weavers. I had a young Hopi weaver in the other day who was looking and very knowledgeable about old stuff too. I loved it. He was showing me things. And I said, you really should do Indian market. And he showed me his baskets. Fantastic. He goes, no, when I'm planting for my garden, I have to be there for that. And I can't really do that.
Oh, super.
And I thought, okay. So he's got it. He understands it. He knows the old baskets. He's still creating. And he's very traditional in his beliefs of what he needs to do, what's important to him. Yes, he would do really well at Indian Market in Santa Fe, but his crops came before that.
Sure.
So it's still there.
Yeah.
But, a lot of it's changed. When you and I were doing this, there was lots of trading posts. Those are all basically gone other than really the Totalina trading posts.
And those were some of the most just hallowed places to go in the world just to see.
And you probably went to a lot of those, didn't you?
I went to a lot of them. And I was just such a good friend with Billy Malone. And Bruce McGee were not at Shanto, but at Pinon, right above the Hopi reservation. I'd make the rounds through there before McGee went back to Hopi and then to the herd. Billy went to just seeing that and going down into Inscription House and Shanto and all those places were just super. the amount of friends you had and the amount of friends we have. And you, by being in this business, can you imagine the amount of friends and artists you know that this opened the door for?
Yeah.
You said most, like about the old weavings. I mean, Andrew Nagin was just a wonderful friend. We talked every Sunday night. Both of us got much more interested in the textiles too. He had his own
museum, Los Colores,
with his Mexican material there and everything. So yeah, all that friendship and all those partners, and he worked with Ray for a while. Ray did a great interview here. I never forget when Ray was doing his house up Canyon Road. He came in, had this big smile, and here's all these unbelievably expensive paintings in there and everything that he and Nat Owings were partnering on and everything. And I said, "Why are you so happy?" He said, "I just bought a dishwasher and a refrigerator and a freezer." And he said, "It was only a few $100s." He said, "So he said, I can, these painters can bring me a new painting, hopefully." And I said, "I felt like just buying a whole warehouse full of those things and just stashing them." I said,
because they're so inexpensive.
Yeah, there's the whole turn of everything. But it's been a pretty neat life. And I think I went through some health problems here recently.
Yeah.
And it put it all back into perspective again. And I got so much support from so many people.
Yeah, you're loved. People love you. Well, you're a really ethical dealer, and people just gravitate to you.
Well, Robert Summers passed a card around at the Old West show, who's just one of the most, that guy's IQ's through the roof. He's one of the most compassionate guys in the world. And I mean, what an interesting person. And how he spends the time on that Blue Heron Blast is incredible, and how interesting it is.
Such a good writer.
But that just... coming back from that and not being able to be on the reservation for almost a month and a half, my son-in-law, who's a orthopedic doctor here in town, one of the greatest guys, he took me out there, and then just having those hugs from everybody, one time I was doing the res, I rolled my RAV4 four times down into a wash.
Yeah.
Called Peggy. She said, she came and picked me up. She said, "We're going right back. You're going to get checked out." I said, "No, we got more weavers to hit here." And so I'd go there, and they say, "Where's your car?" I said, "Well, it's in the bottom of that wash down there, but you have baskets, right? And here's the money for those." I said, "Well, I need those for groceries." So it's just a whole different way of life you wouldn't get working on Wall Street or something like that.
No, because it is a very close community.
It is.
And a lot of that kind of goes through Santa Fe, where everybody meets in the summer for the White Hawk show and Indian Market.
Right.
So, and that show's been going on. Well, it's been going on as long as I've been doing it, basically.
Yep.
So whatever, at least 40 years.
Probably. And Kim is just doing such a great job in trying to keep that show thing together. Now they're all into one show now.
Yeah. Everybody's getting older.
Everybody's getting older.
Yeah.
And but he's got a real compassion for the living Native Americans.
Yeah, of course.
too.
Yeah, he does a show for indigenous art, which is contemporary.
Sure.
Yeah, he's working on it, which is smart. He should, because our profession is going to change dramatically in the next 10 years, because everybody's going to probably have to retire or will pass away.
Right.
And there's a few young people like my son, Charles. There's a few that will, keep it going in that respect, but it'll be different.
Right. And he's a pleasure to work with. And the more the whole key and why I lecture as much as I do to the national parks and different places is because that's the only way. If you educate somebody, even if they don't pick up a rug or a basket from you there, that's in their brain, and maybe next time they're up Canyon Road or at the Grand Canyon or Yosemite, they'll pick up a basket that'll help these remaining contemporary artists, survive better and keep that art going. Did
you ever want to open a gallery? I mean,
well, I just didn't. I've just got a ton of energy, and I don't think I mean, what you started is unbelievable from where you started this. And I mean, and to visualize this art dealer diary thing as well, but look what you've gone to. You've gone through all the paintings and sculptures, and I mean, you're across the board as knowledgeable as Gallegos is.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, but I mean, you've done such a a huge amount for this, and it's just too bad young people don't know more about it. You're also attacking that. Every YouTube, you want to, if you want to say, what about coral rings and made by Hopis? Boom. You got a whole video on it. You got a video on everything.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for younger people that might be listening to this to go, this is a viable business. This is a wonderful business. And, you don't have to be Native American to be in it, because you're going to work with Native American artists. If you decide to go into this business, you're going to be surrounded in the culture of the people, and if you're not, then you're really not in this business, quite frankly.
Sure.
So, I like to think that it doesn't stop with us, but a next generation can find the same thing that we did. I think a lot of ours, and you can tell me if you think this is not true or not, but I think a lot of all of us started kind of in that, again, I was a little later, but in that early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. I think a lot of it had to do with the Vietnam War, too, is that people got done with that or involved in that. And for whatever reason, the whole Native American experience for our generation, when we were young kids, was exploding. And we go, this is something.
That's right.
Don't you think?
Oh, you said it. Yes. Yeah. And the possibilities overseas and everything were just ineffable. There were just so many ways to go to promote this and really make it happen. It was on I went up to Saks Fifth Avenue and I'd sell them turquoise,
Yeah.
And Scots, and it was just, plus it was such a blessing for me because on some of the places I lectured, like at Tanque Verde Guest Ranch, I ended up guiding their hikes in the Swiss Alps because I'd been over there climbing for quite a bit too. And it was that whole anthropology of the Swiss culture. And
let's talk about your climbing, because you're really an expert climber.
Well, I was.
You still are. You may not be able to do it as what you were, but you were an expert climber. It was such a, I take a time off. What really relates it to Native American art, and I mentioned this to you briefly a couple of days ago, is that on the start of a hike through the Alps, there was a gal that came and joined our hike that lived there in the town of Brig. And I looked at her, and she had like 2 or 3 Loloma bracelets on each hand like this. Right.
And I said, my gosh, do you know Charles Loloma made those? I'm sure. And she said, yes. I said, well, obviously, there's just as much detail on the inside. She said, yeah. She said, yeah, I knew Charles very well. I said, how was that? She said, my husband used to live in Scottsdale. We'd spend the winters there. And he had an agency called Max of Switzerland that sold Jaguars, and Lola would come down and trade him all this stuff for this. So she says, it's my everyday wear, So she's going through the,
God.
but it's, the anthropology of Polynesia, of Mexico and Mesoamerica, of the Southwest, the Great Basin, but the whole Swiss thing with people and everything's through linguistic stocks, that's equally as interesting. And the whole thing I always had wanted to climb the Eiger, the Monk, and the Jungfrau, which are the big triumphant 3 peaks there. Do you know the legend behind that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, the Eiger is the ogre. He's this treacherous guy that wants to get to the Jungfrau, this beautiful young maiden, but the celibate monk keeps him away.
I see.
So it's a real kind of a deal for all climbers to climb all three of those.
Did you climb any of them?
I climbed all 3 of them.
You did climb all 3?
Yeah.
And how tall are they?
They're like 14,000 feet or something like that. Mont Blanc's the highest, which is 16 in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Did you climb that?
Yeah. But the Matterhorn is the one that's kind of in everybody's sights because it's in a valley and it's so prominent that it just sticks up like that.
Right.
The standard routes up from Zermatt on the Swiss side, the real hairy one, which is the last really big climb I did, is called the Lion's Ledge. You go over into Italy and climb it up. The Matterhorn cuts Italy and Switzerland right in half.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a picture of this. The Italian summit is 1 meter lower than the Swiss summit.
Yeah.
So you make it to there, but then you've got this knife blade of ice that's just like
straight down,
thousands of feet below that you've got to go And the guy you climb with, I led that. So he watched me. And if I would stumble, and if I start falling to the right, he'd jump off to the left, and the rope would catch us.
I see.
And then we come back up and resume like that. But we didn't trip, so it was okay. Yeah.
That has to be exhilarating.
And we had good Swiss food in Zermatt that night when we got back down and everything. Yeah. That's like a 3-day climb though. That's pretty tough. This is like climbing Half Dome in Yosemite, where you spend a couple of nights on the wall.
And you've got 2 new knees, so
I got 2 new knees, and I guided 2 orthopedic surgeons from town here where our son used to work, where now our son-in-law works, and they said, golly, you need to show how good those knees are and how wonderful an invention this is. So I said, I don't want to really get any publicity. So I talked to my doctor, and he said, you ought to do that because somebody might be really apprehensive and in a ton of pain, and that could show that you can live a life after 50, 60, 70 with these things that'll make your life easier.
Yeah.
So I did. They took me up Sabino Canyon, put me on a chair with 2 poles up.
Yeah.
I said, what's this for? And here's this huge poster that they put in all the airports across the country. LaGuardia, Atlanta, Portland, everything. It says, what would you do if you were a mountain guide who couldn't get out of a chair? Terry DeWald didn't sit still for long.
Wow.
So here are these guys they play ball with, Mark. Like one guy, my cousin in Atlanta says, what are you doing on this chair?
Yeah.
And a guy from that still lives in New York, he said, you're in LaGuardia, and have you really lost your mind?
Yeah.
And so it was pretty nice. But boy, I got wonderful correspondences on that. And I love helping the people.
And that probably did help a lot of people.
It did help some people.
Yeah. Sure. Even if it helps one.
Yes.
That's enough, right?
But all because of this Smitty guy that helped me go out there, and it all unfolded from then, and all these wonderful people we've met. It just couldn't get any better. And I don't know how many more years I'll be doing the White Hawk show. I said last year was my last, but we'll see what happens here.
You're definitely doing it this year.
Definitely doing it this year.
And that's basically the second, which that's August 8th, I think, this year for like 4 or 5 days.
Right.
It's like 8th to the 12th or something.
Yeah. So. And I'll just hope that on the little website I've got that people can still pick up stuff here after they've taken all your inventory away and be okay.
Yeah. And how can they find you?
It's just terrydewald.com.
Yeah. So they can get a hold of you that way. Yeah.
But Peggy and I are a one-man operation.
Yeah.
And there's not, there's pictures of everything, but there's not really measurements, but they're free to call and everything like that.
So how do you think our business is going to change in the next decade?
Boy, I loved it when you asked Ray that.
Yeah.
Because that guy is
smart.
He's a savant. And he was sort of on the fence about it. And I don't know how you really are realistic about this because you love it so much.
Right.
And you don't want this interest to die. But you look at the color of hair of people come through some of these shows.
Right.
Yet you look at some of the people that come through your galleries at the openings.
They're young.
They're young. They're buying probably more contemporary things, but they're also interested in the heritage of the old stuff.
Right.
But maybe they're thinking they're getting more for their money in the contemporary things, even though it can be extremely expensive sometimes too, depending upon the artist and everything. But I think it'll always survive, but maybe to just a lesser degree.
Yeah.
When that whole Indian boom hit from the 1890s to the Depression, it lay dormant until the 1970s. Then it came up again. There's not going to be nearly that amount of material that reemerges, I don't think. And it might be tough. It'll never be like it was.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the top of the tsunami right there.
Right.
But it's still, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
It's still just wonderful, And
I love my job.
Yeah. And I love my gals out there and God, it's just been a wonderful ride, and coming close to pretty much eating in the hospital with all the infections I had and getting ripped open 2 or 3 times and everything, it really makes it that much more sweet to, even though I might be 70, 80% of what I used to be physically or something, it's still just great being here and experiencing it. Yeah. And your grandkids and everything else.
And I still find it, fascinating. There'll be something come in and I don't understand it or know it, or, I can't put the puzzle together, and you get to figure it out.
Yes.
It's not an easy subject actually a subject you cannot master. There's too much to know, which I think is what makes it so wonderful, because it is so difficult. You can pick a specialty area and really learn it and do great. I mean, look at Al Anthony with pots, or Charles King with pots.
Oh, boy.
Or Andrew Fisher with pottery.
Yeah.
All those things. Yourself with baskets and rugs. That's really kind of your area that you've made it. But it's just, there's so much to understand about it. And, and the people really are terrific.
They are.
Yeah.
And it's so much to share. Yeah. And you've been so munificent in your efforts on doing this, just like an Eddie Basha, where right. It's just, God, we could talk about him for 3 hours.
Yeah.
But it's just
remarkable guy.
Yeah. But as generous as he was with everybody, and having the Native Americans right there that he wanted to help as much as anything.
Right.
It's neat to have known all these people.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. You do meet a lot of very interesting people in this profession. I mean, we know who they are, and there's just a lot of interesting ones that go through that are interested in it.
That's right.
And they're going to go to the experts, I'm sure you've gotten calls that you go, "Oh, okay, I know who you are. You want to know about what?"
Sure. Yeah. And not only that, but like some of the celebrities that we have met that are just wonderful people that are just amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stories about them too, but that's it.
Yeah. Well, so we can save those for around the fire.
You bet.
And dinner. Was there anything we haven't covered that you would like to cover and talk about?
No, other than just the sentiment I have for Peggy and how not only she helped with this business and probably doing columns right now for me too, just like Kathleen and you. I mean, what a woman she is, and for you two to do this and what she went through with all the website stuff and everything else. But that, and then for Peggy to dressing these wounds and everything for months and months and months. It's just
that's what good spouses can be.
Golly, for rich or for poor.
We're very lucky.
You bet. We were really lucky. We were really blessed.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing. I know you're a very private person. And it's hard for you to do this, but it's important. You're an important, as I've told you, you're an important person in our community. You're an important person. You're an educator, a teacher, not only early on in baseball and that, but really in Native American arts, basketry, textiles, all these things. When I have a question, about something, I call you.
Sure. And I make up the answer.
And you make up something that sounds very realistic.
Yes.
So I think to me, that's going to be the hardest part, is that if you get something you really need to know, and maybe those people aren't there to answer that question.
Yes.
And that's coming, I'm afraid. There's a lot of knowledge out there that's going to get lost.
There is, but it sure is sweet.
As it goes on. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Great, Mark.
Terry, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we can go out and do some business if you want. I'm sure there's some new stuff out there that you want to see.
Let's jump on it. Thanks.
Good. Terry DeWald. All right. Thanks. That was fantastic. See, I told you wouldn't need any of that.
Yep. And I think I covered everything I wanted except for a couple of funny baseball stories. So we're okay. And that's nothing to do with all.
Yeah.